the spring. But we're going to get a lot of questions answered in this week 1. So, King, my first question for you is, what questions will we know answered, will we have answered by the end of week 1?
I think one of the first and most important questions is, can Davis Mills be the best quarterback in the Pac-12? Now, we've talked a lot about Davis Mills this entire offseason. We know he's going to be the key to Stanford's season. And I'm not saying this will answer the question of, is he the best quarterback in the Pac-12? And frankly, I don't think he will be. But it's going to answer the question of, can he be that kind of elite quarterback for the Cardinal? Because if he goes out and performs well on the road in Autzen Stadium, albeit without crowds, albeit with an Oregon defense that's probably not quite as strong as it was last season, we'll talk about that later, it would still prove a lot to not only Stanford fans, but really to the rest of the country, that Davis Mills can be the guy that the prognosticators in his recruiting cycle thought he was, that he can be one of the elite quarterbacks in the entire country. And I think that, frankly, with the defenses on Stanford's schedule, even if Oregon's defense takes a significant step back this year, they still might be the best defense the Cardinal face, up there with maybe Washington and Cal. And so this is going to tell everybody in the country a lot about Davis Mills. And I think it's also an opportunity for him in the 4:30 p.m. Pacific ABC game to show off, because I think he really hasn't been talked about much in the national media, which is surprising given where he was in the recruiting cycle. But everybody just wants to talk about KJ Costello transferring out. And, you know, what they don't want to say, the conversation they don't want to have is, I think Stanford got better at the QB position with Davis Mills as the starter. And we've talked about that a lot. But we see KJ Costello struggles at Mississippi State. That's not who Davis Mills is, and I think he's ready to prove that. But if he performs extremely well, we'll know that he can be in the running for the best quarterback in the Pac-12.
Absolutely. And that was the very first question that I think this game 1 is going to answer. Because as you were saying, KJ Costello didn't transfer. He was beat out by Davis Mills. And what this game is going to show us is what Davis Mills is going to look like. Because what I see the difference between my prediction at 5-1 and yours at 3-3 is, how well does Davis Mills play? So I'm completely with you on that one. And then this other question that you kind of brought up with that 4:30 Pacific time slot on ABC is, can Stanford recover its brand? Because as you were just mentioning, Stanford isn't viewed as a top of the Pac-12 team anymore. They're just not. They had one 4-8 season, and now Davis Mills isn't getting the hype that he maybe would have a few years ago coming in as a top-ranked recruit. So can Stanford recover its brand? They're facing an Oregon team that's ranked number 12 overall in the nation in the AP poll. So what Stanford does against Oregon, who is in the same boat as every other Pac-12 school, they haven't really faced anybody. So Stanford could get a big win. It would be a far cry to say they're going to upset Oregon, but even having a competitive game against Oregon, a team that's ranked so high nationally, says a lot about where the program is at and what the program could be at the end of the year, because I think this game can answer a lot of questions about whether Stanford is actually a contender. And what Stanford does in this game is going to tell a lot of people about how real Stanford really is.
Yeah, and Stanford was picked to finish 4th in the Pac-12 North this year. And I think that's fair given that they finished last in the Pac-12 North last season. But when you look at the rosters in the Pac-12 North and what each team has returning and the kind of talent they have on that roster, there's no reason why Stanford should be pegged 4th right out of the gate. I think it's disrespectful, and you're exactly right that this is a chance to recover the brand on national television. Yes, the unfortunate thing is you're running opposite Clemson Notre Dame. So most of the national audience will be tuned elsewhere. But nonetheless, it is going to be as big a game as Stanford has played in a couple of years, maybe even going back to the Notre Dame game in 2018, just simply because it's the Pac-12 showcase in opening week. And, you know, I think you're exactly right that this is the Cardinals' chance to not only take back their brand, but to maybe take back the Pac-12 North. Then another question I have, will Stanford's defense take a step forward in 2020? We are going to know that after this game. Stanford's defense was bad last year. It was, frankly, one of the worst in the Pac-12, one of the worst in the country in passing defense. The rushing defense was okay, but I think a lot of that is that Pac-12 teams don't run the ball very well or did not run the ball very well last season. So I think those numbers were a bit inflated. But don't let that side fool you. Stanford could not stop anybody last season in the games that mattered. I mean, you had Davis Mills throw for 500 yards in a losing effort. That is inexcusable. I think there's a chance for the Stanford defense to kind of surprise some people all season, but particularly in this game. Oregon is replacing all 5 starting offensive linemen. Oregon is going to have a brand new starting quarterback in this game. Even if that starting quarterback is Tyler Shuck, who I think will end up being very good, this is a huge spot for him to come into off limited practice. We know they've had some COVID issues, mostly from false positives in the past couple weeks, which probably have slowed down practice. And listen, Justin Herbert was not that good over his past 2 seasons in college. He struggled in big games. He always seemed to be that overrated college quarterback who the NFL scouts love. But now, look what he's doing in the NFL. He's tearing it up. Outside of the second half yesterday, he has had a fantastic rookie season. He might be the rookie of the year frontrunner. What does that tell me? It tells me that Oregon's offense is doing something wrong. And you got a new offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead. I think he's going to be a great hire eventually. But Mario Cristobal's system is evidently not quarterback friendly. If Justin Herbert can perform better for a bad Chargers team than he could for a very talented Oregon team. So something tells me that Oregon's offense is going to be kind of paltry this season, and that Stanford could potentially be the first of many defenses to showcase that weakness. But if they don't, if Oregon tears up Stanford, then it could be a long year for the Cardinal D.
And I'm totally with you on that defensive question. And I think the question that's going to be answered the most is Stanford's run defense, because I think CJ Verdell is a great test for this Stanford defense, what they can do this year. As you mentioned, Oregon in its roster depth chart today listed their quarterbacks as an or. So not really a sure thing in the passing game, whatever it is. They have a lot of talented receivers, but I don't think they're necessarily the passing threat that's going to tell us if Stanford's defense has made strides in the offseason in terms of aerial attack. But totally with you on the rushing side. We're going to learn a lot about Stanford's tackling, which we talked about in past shows, how much they were able to work on it in the offseason, how much they were able to speed things up, how much all of those Zoom sessions that they've been talking about so much have paid off. And that really kind of goes in this question that Stanford, that Luke is asking in the chat, is if Stanford is sub 500 again, is David Shaw's job at risk? And that we've talked about this before, is no, right? He has lifetime job security. Will people be calling for his job? Absolutely. But after this game, we'll see a lot about where Stanford is as a program. Even if Stanford isn't able to make those choices, we'll see a lot about where Stanford actually is as a football program.
Yeah, and let me add one more question to the pile that I think is particularly relevant to where Stanford is as a program. And that's, can Stanford's offensive line be good enough to support Stanford's very good skill position players in 2020? Stanford's offensive line used to carry the team. It used to be the skill position talent, which was the laggard. I mean, you had an offensive line that made any running back look good, and they happened to have some very good running backs, but they happened to have some pretty pedestrian quarterbacks who still were able to put up big stats because they had fantastic production and protection in front of them. This year, it kind of looks like the opposite on paper. You got great wide receivers. You got, I think, good running backs. You got, on paper, a potentially elite quarterback. The offensive line, I think it's going to be pretty good. I mean, you return the same 5 guys who started the last 6 games last year. You return a few other guys with experience. I think you're probably going to see a guy like Branson Bragg and maybe freshman Miles Hinton step into that offensive line, even though they were not among the starters last season. And so you got depth, you got reasonable talent, but I still think that it could be a liability for the Cardinal because it has been the past couple seasons. And this is absolutely the game that would showcase that, because I think perhaps the strength of Oregon's team is in their front 7. They're losing 5 of their top 6 tacklers this season, but they're returning their top 3 sack artists, so their top 3 pass rushers, including Kayvon Thibodeau, who was the #1 recruit in the country in 2019, and I think might be a first-team All-American this season, and likely top 10 draft pick sometime in the near future. He could terrorize this young Stanford offensive line. But Stanford's offensive line is able to get pretty good protection for Davis Mills. And if they're able to, generate any kind of run game, I think we're going to feel a lot differently about this offensive line leaving the Oregon game, win or lose. So I think it's a real showcase game to see, can Stanford start to get back a little bit of that intellectual brutality era offensive line play, or is it going to be more of the same from the past couple of years where they could not run the ball at all and could barely protect the quarterbacks either?
King, you have to be reading my mind right now because